Hi, I'm Lynn Fowler. I'm the leader of King of Glory Ministries International. I'd like to thank you for choosing this video. Before we begin, please just hit that subscribe button that's down below there, and also the little notification bell so that you make sure that you don't miss any of our videos. If you would like to contact us about arranging ministry or about connecting with King of Glory Ministries International, there's links below for our website and our Facebook page, and there's also a couple of links where you can support this ministry through Patreon or through our Teespring store. So now I just pray that you'll be blessed by this video, and if you are, please give us a like and share this video on your social media pages or wherever you share stuff with your friends. So right now, here's today's message. Bless you. 10 days ago, when a lot of people were celebrating St. Patrick's Day, our Jewish friends were celebrating the Feast of Purim. And Purim is not one of the Mosaic feasts, where one of the major feasts of Israel that was instituted through the Mosaic law. It's a feast that came about as a result of the events recorded in the book of Esther. And so today we're going to take a little look at the book of Esther and see what we can learn from that book. And just to give a bit of background, Esther is set in Persia. And the Persian Empire was this huge swathe of territory that went right through, from India right through the northern part of Africa. And in, I think it was 539 BC, Persia overran the Babylonian Empire. And in the book of Daniel it's recorded, the end of chapter 5 I believe, it talks about Belshazzar, who was the son of Nebuchadnezzar. Now Nebuchadnezzar had several encounters with God through the prophet Daniel. He'd come to the point where even if he didn't actually worship Yahweh, he certainly acknowledged him and honoured him, and had even sent out a letter through his kingdom saying that all the people were to honour and acknowledge the God of Daniel. Belshazzar, his son, hadn't learned anything from his father's experience. And so Belshazzar was there absolutely defiling the instruments that had been taken to Babylon from the temple, using the cups and so on for a drunken orgy, and worshipping gods of silver and gold, and focusing on the natural things. And in the middle of this huge drunken orgy, there appeared a hand and wrote on the wall, "Mene, mene, tekel, peres." And Belshazzar freaked out. They called in Daniel to interpret what this was all about. And Daniel said, "This is it. The words mean numbered, weighed, divided. Your days are numbered. You've been weighed in the balance and found wanting, and your kingdom is divided and given to the Medes and Persians." And the word says that very night Belshazzar was killed, and Darius the Mede took over the kingdom. Now, Darius was the son of a guy called Xerxes, but he also had a son called Xerxes. And the younger Xerxes was the king who was the king in Persia. So in other words, the book of Esther is set around about that time, towards the end of the Israelites' exile in Babylon, towards the end of Daniel's lifetime. The story basically is Xerxes, the king of Persia, has this massive festival which went for 6 months, in which he displayed all the worth and the value of his kingdom to all the people around about him. You know, basically a big ego trip. And at the end of that time, he threw a feast which lasted for a week, and again was basically a big booze up. And at the end of that booze up, he calls for his queen, Vashti, to come so he can show her off to all his drunken mates. Vashti, who's herself having a party with her ladies, says, "No way, not going to happen." Now, personally, I'm with Vashti. You know, if I'd had a husband who got drunk and wanted to parade me like a piece of prize meat before his mates, I would have said no too. That's beside the point. Because of her defiance, Vashti was deposed as queen, and then the king's advisor said to him, "Well, you need a queen. Let's send right throughout the whole empire and find a beautiful girl who can be your queen." And so they went through the whole empire. They brought a whole heap of young girls back, including this girl called Esther. Now Esther, she must have only been a young teenager, because in that culture, girls would have been married by 15, 16, 20 at the latest. But she had a cousin who was a much older man who had been brought to Babylon with the exiles from Judah. And when Esther's parents died, he became her guardian. So Esther is among these girls who's they come and say, "Right, you're coming to the harem to see whether you can be queen." So she was taken from Babylon to Susa, the capital of Persia, about 400 kilometres to the east. And no doubt, because he wasn't going to let her go alone, her uncle, Mordecai, followed her. So they're there in Persia. Esther goes through the 12 months of preparation. She goes in and meets the king, and the king likes her, and he says, "Right, you're it. You're going to become queen." So she is promoted to be queen of Persia. And in the meanwhile, Mordecai, her uncle, has heard these two guys plotting to kill the king. And he tells Esther, and Esther tells the king, and the guys get caught out and killed. And that's sort of recorded in the records. Now there's a bad guy comes on the scene, a guy called Haman. And boo hiss, yes. Haman is very much puffed up with his own importance, and he's one of the king's chief men, and he expects everybody to bow and scrape before him. And Mordecai, who's a Jew and is not going to bow to anybody but the Lord, refuses, and that makes Haman mad. And so he devises this plot where he says, "You know, I'm not just going to deal with Mordecai, I'm going to get rid of the whole of his race, so all these Jewish people, I'm going to get rid of them." And so he devises this scheme, and he comes to the king and says, "Look, I will put this amount of money into the treasury if you will write a letter or issue a decree under the law of the Medes and Persians, which can't be repealed, saying that on this date, all the people can attack the Jews and kill them." And the king just said, "Okay, go ahead, do it," you know. And so that letter went out. And of course, when all the Jews heard this, they were horrified, and they were crying out, and what's this all about? And Mordecai, Esther's uncle, was going about in sackcloth, and when Esther heard of it, she sent for him and said, "What's going on?" And he told her, and he said, you need to go to the king about this." And she said, "Well, I can't, to go before the king without being invited is like a death sentence. And he hasn't invited me for the last month. And the only way that can be overcome is if he extends the golden scepter to you." And Mordecai said to her, and you've probably heard these words many times before, he said, "It may be that you have come to the kingdom for such a time as this. If you don't do this, don't think that you're going to get away scot-free, because they'll find you even in the palace." And Esther's response was, "Well, go away and fast for me, and then I'll go to the king, and if I perish, I perish." And so she goes to the king, and the king extends the gold scepter to her. It's wonderful to see you, Esther. What can I do for you? What can I give you? Up to half my kingdom I'll give you. And Esther, who's, in spite of being a very young girl, is a very cluey young girl. She says, I just want you and Haman to come to a banquet that I've prepared for you. And so King and Haman go to this banquet. Haman, after the banquet, goes off, I'm so good. Look at me, you know. But again, Mordecai won't bow to him, and he gets really mad about this. And he's trying to say, well, you know, look, put up a big pole that you can hang Mordecai on. And at that first banquet, again, the king asks Esther, what do you want? She says, I just want you and Haman to come again tomorrow to the banquet I prepared. And so Haman sets up this pole, and he's going in early in the morning to the king to say, can I get your permission to hang Mordecai on this pole? But in the meantime, the king hasn't been able to sleep that night. And he, to have to laugh at it, to help him sleep, he calls for the record of his reign, which tells you something about how boring the document must be. And he gets it read to him. And in that document, it comes across this place where it talks about how Mordecai had heard these two guys and reported it and saved the king's life. And the king says, has anything been done for him? Did he get any reward for this? And they say, no, he hasn't. So at the very moment when Haman is coming in to ask permission to hang Mordecai, the king is thinking, I've got to reward this guy. And so Haman comes in, he says, what should I do for the person I want to honour? And Haman thinks, that's me. And he tells him, get a horse that the king's ridden, and a robe that the king's worn, and have the guy sit on the horse and robe him with the robe, and have one of the chief princes take him through the city declaring, this is what's done for the man the king delights to honour. And then the king says, do it for Mordecai. Oops! And of course, Haman is now absolutely devastated. But he has to do what the king says. And he's just finished taking Mordecai around, declaring how wonderful he is. And they come to get him, to take him to this second banquet with Esther. And this time the king says, what can I do for you, Esther? And Esther says, save my people. Keep us from being killed. And the king says, well, who would do this? And she says, this guy, Haman. And of course that's curtains for Haman. And Mordecai, then the king brings Mordecai in and gives him Haman's position and raises him up. Now, the interesting thing about the book of Esther is that nowhere in the book does it actually overtly mention God. Nowhere. But God is so obviously working through the book. And I guess that's the first lesson that we can draw from the book of Esther. We sing that song, don't we? Even when I don't see you, you're working. Even when I don't feel you, you're working. God's presence, whether we can see him or not, whether we can feel him or not, whether we're aware of him or not, whether we talk about him or not, he is present, he is working. No matter what's going on in the world, no matter what's going on in the political situations here in Australia, in the Ukraine, in America, or anywhere else, we might not see him working, but he is present. He is working. And we need to keep our focus on that. The second thing to draw from the book of Esther is God's placement. You know, just think about the things that God had to put in place for the book of Esther to play out the way it did. First of all, he had to cause Mordecai to be one of the people who was deported from Judah to Babylon. And Mordecai must have been a very young child at the time, because otherwise, he would have been just too old at the time of the book of Esther. God had to arrange that Esther's parents, when they died, had the kind of relationship with Mordecai that would cause them to have made arrangements for him to become Esther's guardian. He had to set in place the whole deposition of Vashti as queen. Now, that doesn't mean that God caused the king to have a drunken party. It doesn't mean that he caused Queen Vashti to do a dummy spit. But he knew that they were going to do this. And even without violating our will, he is able to bring us into a place where what we do will be what he wants. He is able to, he knows how we're going to react in any situation. So all he has to do is to put us into the situations where we will react the way he knows we're going to react, the way he needs us to react for what he wants to bring about. He had to go ahead of the people who were searching through the whole Persian Empire to find this beautiful girl. Now, as I said, the Persian Empire was huge. It stretched right across. And I guarantee that these people didn't go to every single girl in the kingdom. But they managed to find, 400 miles away from where Xerxes was, managed to find this girl, Esther, and bring her back. Well, God has a purpose for your life. He has things that he wants to accomplish in you and through you. And whether you recognize it or not, for all of your life up till now, he has been working to put things in place to make those things happen. He's been bringing together the right people, brought together the right people to be your parents, brought together the right people to influence you when you were a child, put you into the right circumstances that would begin to shape you to what he wanted you to be. And wherever you are today, unless you have done a Jonah and deliberately gone the other way, you can be pretty sure that you're where God wants you to be, because he has worked all those things together to bring you to where you are now. He has put those things in place for what he wants to do in you and through you. Now, when Esther got to the palace in Susa, she didn't automatically just go from, here I am, I'm queen. She had to go through 12 months of preparation, of special beauty treatments. And I'm sure that preparation time probably included more than just physical beauty treatments. It probably included being given an understanding of the protocols of the palace. It would have included being given an understanding of diplomacy, of all the things that a queen needed to know. Time of preparation. Every one of us has a time of preparation for what God wants for us. Sometimes it's a short time, sometimes it's a long time. But we need to be willing to go along with that preparation. The thing that stands out about Esther is that she worked willingly with the people that were involved in this time of preparation for her. So much so that she became a favourite within the harem. And she relied on them to lead her and direct her in relation to that role that she might possibly have. For that 12 months, she didn't know. She didn't know that she was going to become queen. There was a remote possibility, but we don't know how many girls were brought back to the harem from that great gathering, how many there were who were contending for this role. There was a maybe that Esther would get it, but there was also a very big maybe that she wouldn't. But she submitted to the preparation and the training. And we also need to submit to that preparation and training, no matter where we are today. You know, God always has more for us. And we never really come to the point where we can say, I've made it, that's it. You know, I'm at the pinnacle where God wants me to be. Because it's a bit like the bear went over the mountain, you know. The bear went over the mountain, and what do you think he saw? He saw another mountain. And that's what it's like in the Christian life. There's always more for us. And there's always more preparation. We need to be submissive to that preparation. Because if we're not, then we're going to end up going around and around the mountain again. And we're going to keep going around the mountain until we finally get it and come to that place where we're submitting to what God's working in our lives. And then we can move on to the next step. When she'd been through all the preparation, then came the promotion. That night when it was her turn to go to the king, and the king said, yes, I like you. You're the best. You're going to become the queen. The time comes for our promotion. But Esther didn't start exerting authority in that new position. She stepped into the position, yes, but she had to grow into that position. And when we're promoted, we also need to understand that, you know, at that new level that we've been promoted to, we're basically apprentices. And so we need to grow into that new level. And so often I see it where somebody, yes, is promoted to a new level, particularly in ministry, and suddenly they see themselves as being the top of the heap, as it were. But we're not the top of the heap. We're just learning. You know, Esther was a queen with all plates. And we are whatever God has called us to be, with L plates. We're learning. Hopefully always learning. But after the promotion came the proving. She was queen. But was she going to be able to stand in that position? Was she going to be able to stand for God in that position, even though God's not mentioned? Was she going to stand in righteousness? And this challenge that was put before her was no easy thing. No, you have to go and talk to the king. But I can't because he hasn't invited me. But you have to go and risk your life. I wonder if the day will come for any of us when our position is tested, when we are proved by something as dramatic as, are you prepared to risk your life to do this? Are you prepared to stand for righteousness, even if it may cost you your life? Because that's what God requires of us. You know, he said, the one who loves his life, wants to hold his life, will lose it. The one who loses his life for my sake will keep it. Now that may mean physical loss of life, it may mean a metaphorical loss of life, of laying down the things that we hold dear. One way or another, our promotion will be proved. And how we respond to that proving will determine not only our future, but the future of those around us. Will determine not only how we go on with God, but how how other people respond to God. And then finally, Esther prevailed. You know, it's such a fantastic story because we see the victory in the end. We see how God brought things together. You know, God caused Xerxes to be sleepless that night so that he would call for the record of his reign to be read to him, and hopefully put him to sleep. But instead of putting him to sleep, it reminded him of an injustice of this man who had saved his life but had got nothing for it, had not been rewarded. Which then, of course, caused him to tell Haman to go and do this for Mordecai. And then because of Esther's faithfulness, Haman was exposed and finally dealt with. And the result of that, coming out of that, was this feast of Purim that the Jews celebrate. Purim because when Haman was making the plans to destroy the Jews, he tossed the dice to decide on what day. And the word for dice is pur, which the plural is Purim. And so they instituted this feast of Purim that the Jews celebrate each year. And yes, that's Old Testament. But you know what? We can still learn a lot from the Old Testament. And from the book of Esther, we can learn that God's present no matter whether we can see it or not. We can learn that God has gone ahead of us and prepared the way for us. We learn that there's a time of preparation for us. And that when we're promoted, that promotion will be proven before we prevail. So let's just take those lessons and run with them. So today, I just want to open the meeting. Perhaps we can turn off the video, just so nobody gets embarrassed. But if God's spoken to you today and you want to respond to that some way, then I invite you to come out for prayer. Also, if you have a physical need,